You're listening to The Virgin Sex Educator, a podcast devoted to tackling the taboo and finding the connection between spirituality and sexuality. To submit your anonymous questions, click the link in my Instagram bio. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is my LDS parenting series in connection and partnership with Sex Ed Rescue. I'm Nikki, your host and active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And these episodes are really to help dive into the top questions that I get as a sex educator and to really point you towards all of the resources that are available on Sex Ed Rescue to answer more in depth these questions. So I'm really here to just add a little bit more of an LDS perspective on these topics. But with this particular topic, I do highly recommend that you go on to sexedrescue.com and look at the resources available. If you just type in the search bar masturbation, then there will be a plethora of resources for you that Kath has created, a lot of different blog posts, links to other information. It really is such a resource. I have spent weeks on her website seeing what she has, and this particular topic is one that I have now, at this point, spent over a year studying. I genuinely cannot express to you how much I have researched this topic. It has been at least like 5 to 10 hours a week for the last year. I have been reading and studying and researching and pondering my own thoughts on this topic because not only in an LDS sphere, but in a grander religious, like Christian sphere, this is the most untouchable topic. Pun intended. It has a lot of tension, and it's also my most asked question. Out of everything that I teach, everything that I cover, this is the topic that everyone has a question about, and it's never spoken to me in like a normal pitch. It's always like in a corner, someone comes over and like whispers it to me of like, what's your stance on masturbation? So I understand how taboo of a topic this is. I truly believe that this is the most taboo topic that we have. And that, to me, as someone in the field of human sexuality, as a sex educator, makes me curious. That really tugs at the parts of me that says, like, why? Why are we so scared of this? What is it about masturbation that terrifies us, that makes us so deeply uncomfortable, that just instantly the word itself, the thought of it, adds tension to a room in a church building? Like, what is it about it that is so scary and intimidating to a lot of people? So that is something that I have really tackled this year, is honing in on my own understanding, but also how to teach this to an LDS audience. Now, where it gets really fun and challenging today is I normally teach this in context to young single adults and to adult couples, to divorced members. That is my bread and butter. Like, that's who I usually teach this to. So today was a fun challenge to take everything that I teach at, I would say a very high level of comprehension, and how do I take these principles and then help parents know how to teach it to their children to ultimately avoid the issues that the current narrative and taboo nature of this topic has created. Because I specialize in sexual dysfunction, and I cannot tell you how many people that I encounter on a daily basis that have sexual dysfunction, and a lot of times it stems from these early teachings of our bodies, of sexuality, of masturbation, how bad and wrong and terrible and sinful it is, when that's actually not the doctrine. So we're gonna just, in 30 minutes, I could go on for 10 hours on this topic, and on my Patreon, in a couple months, will be having an entire section just devoted to this topic, going through the history of masturbation in early Christianity, helping understand how we got here and our narrative and where that comes from, and helping debunk a lot of myths. It's not in the Bible, it's not in the Book of Mormon, it's not in Scripture. It is in the church handbook. It can be found in section 32.6.4.1 that states, failure to comply with some church standards, a membership council is not held for the actions listed below. And it has a list. It says inactivity in the church, not fulfilling church duties, not paying tithing, sins of omission, masturbation, not complying with the word of wisdom, and then it has a little like using pornography except for child pornography or intensive or compulsive use of pornography that has caused significant harm to a member's marriage or family. So that is where it is mentioned. It is a bullet point under a section that says a membership council is not needed for the actions listed below. So knowing that, we can now have a conversation about masturbation. What it is, what it's not, how we teach it, how that doesn't really serve us very well. Let's get some normalization in here. But in order to do that, you, as the parent, need to get comfortable with this topic. I mean, I can only help you so much with how to teach your children, but the most important messaging that your children will ever receive from you is your own comfortability with a topic, which that cannot be expressed with words. That is expressed in your openness to the topic, your reaction when it gets brought up, your reaction when your child sticks their hand down their pants, your reaction to the word itself. All of those things, the absence of the topic, if it is very blatantly absent from vocabulary, from just, conversation in your home, all of those things are going to be mapped by your children. If you have anxiety around this topic, whether you say that or not, it will be noticed by your children. But a parent who is clearly comfortable speaking about this, having it be brought up, having it not be brought up, it doesn't affect them, that is going to create an environment in which you can have these conversations, in which your child will be able to come to you with questions, but then they will also be able to see your reaction and have it be a lot more normalized, and they can see where it's really coming from, that it's not coming from a place of like, oh, mom or dad is anxious about this, and so I therefore need to be anxious as well, but rather mom and dad are really comfortable with this, and so they're telling me something and I don't need to be ashamed. It doesn't add the anxiety onto your child, but rather you can actually have a conversation. Is that making sense? I can't emphasize enough how important it is that as adults, as parents, you get comfortable with this. You have to, because how can you ever teach your children something different if the entire time you are an anxious mess? You can't even speak the word out loud, you're so uncomfortable. Then how do you expect your children to, react to that? They're going to read those emotions, and then they're going to, in a lot of ways, take those on. Well, mom and dad, who are adults and who have their lives together, they are anxious about this, so I, a child, must be too. Whereas if you are comfortable and you create an open space, they're going to map that, and then they will be, therefore, more comfortable with this topic. So it has to start with you. It has to. And it really, I believe, can start with an understanding of how we got here. So let's do a little bit of a history lesson real quick. Jumping back in time to 1712, we see the beginnings of this narrative that masturbation is this horribly sinful, terrible action. Now, where does that come from? Well, there was a document that was made in 1712 called Onania, or the heinous sin of self-pollution. Okay, from the title alone, wow. This was a pamphlet that was distributed first in London and then quickly became distributed throughout all of Europe. It was printed in the thousands. By 1730, there was around 15,000 copies of this pamphlet that was printed, and then it started being translated into other languages, into Dutch and German, and it was the best seller at the time, selling tens of thousands of copies. This was a very big deal. Now, what did this pamphlet contain, you may ask? Well, let me tell you, because it has affected you today in 2026. This pamphlet basically goes through every single illness that you could possibly experience as a human being and says that the cause is masturbation, or in this document, it calls it self-pollution. I'll just read you just one line from this document. It says, "In some, it has been the cause of fainting fits and epilepsies, in others of consumption, and many young men who were strong and lofty before they gave themselves over to this vice have been worn out by it, and by its robbing the body of its balmy and vital moisture, without cough or spitting, dry and emaciated, sent to their graves." I mean, pretty bold document, and scary at that time. You have this, it was actually published anonymously, but then of course a lot of doctors then came on board and was like, yep, here we go, here's the explanation to everything that's wrong with our patients. If we can just blame them and say, we know what you're doing in your bedroom, then this is the cause, is you are touching yourself. That caused a lot of fear, a lot of anguish at the time. Now, I do want to talk about the title because that has a lot to do with us as in Bible readers. So, Onania comes from the story of Onan. Onan is found in Genesis 38. Onan was the second son of Judah, one of Jacob's 12 sons, and Judah had an eldest son named Er, and he was married to a woman named Tamar. But died before him and Tamar had children. So according to that ancient custom at that time, known as the Levirate marriage, was that when a man died without having children, his brother was then expected to marry his widow and produce offspring on his brother's behalf so that the deceased family line and inheritance would continue. So Judah told Onan, the brother, to fulfill his duty. He said, "Go unto your brother's wife and perform your duty as brother-in-law to her. Raise up her offspring for your brother." That is in Genesis 38:8. However, Onan refused to give Tamar a child that would be considered his brother's heir. And so the next verse says, whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled seed on the ground to keep from providing offspring to his brother. This act of deliberately interrupting intercourse to avoid conception angered God. And the passage says that God put Onan to death for what he did. Now, different religions interpret the scripture in a variety of ways, but the LDS perspective believe that it's about Onan's disobedience and selfishness. He wanted the sexual relationships with Tamar, but not the responsibility or the loss of inheritance that came from giving her a son in his brother's name. His sin was refusing his family duty and using Tamar for his own pleasure without honoring the covenants and cultural obligations at that time. So the focus is on the betrayal, greed, and disobedience, not the sexual act itself. But for centuries, this story has been said to show the consequences of masturbation because it says that he spilled his seed on the ground. That spilling of the seed means, he was not able to procreate. He was purposefully defying God's will. And this story is actually why a lot of Christian denominations teach that sex should always be for the purpose of procreation and not just pleasure, which leads some religions to prohibit and strongly discourage birth control. Now, that is not something that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does. By no means do we say that sex is only procreative. In fact, that is something that I really love that our doctrine teaches, is that it is for pleasure. Absolutely 100%. The plan of joy, the plan of happiness, all of it, connection, the law of chastity, it is all so closely linked to pleasure. And I go into that on tons of different occasions. We're not going to focus on it here. But the important thing is you can absolutely use contraception in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is more than just procreative sexes. So this story, the story of Onan, and this translation in the early Christian churches, and then this document that came out called Onania, which is talking about the sin of Onan, and it talks about this self-pollution. This was then distributed everywhere, and we see its effect even now. How this narrative became the driving force at that time and has continued. That, that it's unhealthy. You can get terrible problems if you masturbate. That's not true. That's not true. That has been proven false over and over and over again by modern medicine, by research. The more knowledge that we have, the more we can see, really how ridiculous it was that at this time they believed this. But they went as far as to create metal chastity belts and really made sexual dysfunction, quite a trend at that time. And it was just really, really rough. And then when you start to look at the history of, the Church of Jesus Christ and how in 1830 you had a lot of saints coming over from England who had grown up with this for, now a century. And we have the Quakers and the Protestants, a lot of other religions at that time that were teaching this as well, really foundational in the doctrine at the time. And we see even in, the 1970s, you can absolutely go and look up talks where members of the Quorum of the 12 or of the 70 talk about self-pollution. Now, the great thing that I love about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is we believe in revelation. We believe in change. We believe in greater understanding, and with that greater understanding and knowledge comes a different way to live, a better way to live, a way that is more normalized, a way that is in greater alignment with God and with the actual principles in which we believe. And those principles are that our bodies are a gift from God, that they are for us before they are ever for anyone else, that this is something that we have stewardship over. This is a vessel for our souls, and it is our responsibility to build up our agency, which comes with building up our understanding so that we can make more choices that are in line with what God wants us to do and who we can become, and how we can use our body to facilitate light and goodness and growth within ourselves, and then to be able to grow it in relation to others. Remember, we're going back to our values. What are we valuing? We want to value respect of self and others, respecting the dignity of ourself and others, with a constant striving towards the ultimate goal of healthy, intimate relationships. Having deep friendships, that's what intimacy is, it's deep friendship with other people. So remembering all of that, having that as our base, and an understanding of that it's not just an LDS perspective of like being nervous about this topic. This is something that has been taught incorrectly for a very long time, for centuries. You had doctors saying that masturbation was so sinful, so terrible, that it was the devil inside you, and that it caused every illness and every problem in the world that a person could have. That is extreme, and that we know is not true. But yet, in 2026, in a lot of ways, we still have that narrative. We still teach that. Here's just one more little fun fact example for you to see just how prevalent this is still today. Have you ever heard of cornflakes? Kellogg's cornflakes? Yeah, I'm pretty sure you heard of those. Guess what? I'm about to blow your mind if you didn't know this. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, who was a Seventh-day Adventist, designed cornflakes in the late 19th century as a bland, high-fiber food, and it was meant to discourage the sexual desire of men and to stop masturbation, because they believed that one of the cures to masturbation, there was elixirs and things sold at that time, and there was a lot of doctors that made a lot of money during that time with the fear that they had now produced, and they're like, but don't worry everybody, we have a solution. I made this elixir. Yeah, lots of people were buying elixirs, but Dr. Kellogg came in and said, one of the solutions that's listed is bland foods having no flavor, because flavor then somehow interacts with, it creates desire within you, and then that desire leads to masturbation. So to really help combat that, he decided to come up with cornflakes as this bland food that could be eaten to help stop masturbation. And it's remarkable to me that this is a cereal that we have today. Now his brother eventually did come in and polluted it with sugar, and now it is what we know as frosted cornflakes in America. But this was produced because of Onania, because of this document that was made in 1712. It trickled down, and then now it's a food that we eat in 2026 that all stems from this fear of masturbation. Okay, so what is masturbation? At its simplest level, like most basic, it is just about the body responding to touch in a way that feels good. That is it. And this response, this discovery that, wow, that feels good, happens a lot earlier in childhood than a lot of adults think. Children are aware of their bodies very early on, and they're also very curious. They're going to be exploring. It is their body. This is a vessel that they're living in. So they are going to be curious of their hands, their faces, their feet, and their genitals, because that is a part of who they are. Now, it's not because they're being sexual. A lot of times the mistake that we make, and I think the reason that this topic brings so much sensitivity in relation to children, is that we as adults are adding our, sexual context and the sexuality that we put onto it, and we're then immediately believing that our children are adding that as well. And that's just not the case. That is scientifically untrue. Because children at a very young age, they are exploring themselves truly out of a place of curiosity and, oh, this feels good. They're noticing the sensations and they're finding out, what their body actually does. And for younger kids, this can also be very soothing to them. It can be regulating, it can help them calm down because we know that arousal is linked to our nervous system. So this can be a technique. And we see that even in utero, children will self-soothe, just a little baby will touch their genitals as a way to calm their nervous system. So this is something that literally from even before birth that we can see is natural, is a normal way for a child to discover themselves and as a method of self-soothing. That is normal. We attach as adults this sexual component to it, but it does not inherently have that. We are putting that on with our own anxieties and our own narratives and what we know and what we've been taught. We are adding that. So if we can really take a moment to extract that and look at it for what it is a child discovering their own body, and something feels good. And it's something that can help calm them down. That is natural, that is normal, which is why so many children have this behavior where they will start masturbating in the sense that they are touching themselves. So rather than immediately labeling this as something bad or shameful, we're not actually responding to what is happening. We're responding to what we have been taught that it means. And those two things are not the same. So, of course, as children get older, especially, into adolescence, now there's going to be a shift. There's going to be more awareness, there's going to be additional curiosity, and there's going to be more intensity in their feelings. And there's also going to be now a starting of an association with sexuality. But a lot of times it is more about curiosity and release and like coping with stress or emotion, trying to regulate yourself. So we don't necessarily have to pretend that it's not happening, because whether you like it or not, it probably is. But the question then becomes, how do we want to understand it? Now, when we're talking about understanding something, I really do believe that there needs to be a distinction made here. That masturbation and pornography are not the same thing. They can overlap, but they are not like inherently linked. That distinction, it really matters, because what pornography introduces is something external. So you're bringing in other people, other bodies, other narratives about, what sex is and what it looks like. And we've talked about that in the last episode. We touched on that. So that comes with its own messages, its own influence. But masturbation on its own doesn't necessarily do that. So we need to keep that in mind, because we link it so implicitly with each other. It can really benefit us to separate it, because they are separate. They are different things. And it can also help us come to a better understanding, and really a place that isn't just filled with anxiety because you're saying, well, this leads to this and then this, and no. Okay, we're just looking at masturbation here, which is the touching of one's own body because it feels good. Now, that action of touching oneself is not inherently teaching someone to objectify another person. It's not inherently, shaping expectations of what a relationship should look like. This is a different thing. It is not the same as what pornography can teach. But when we treat them as the same, we lose a lot of clarity, and we end up teaching in a way that causes a lot more confusion than helpfulness. So if we can take a step back from this, history and the fear and the assumptions that we make, and we just look at it through a lens that I've been trying with this whole series to look at things, which is, what are we trying to build? That's our anchor, okay? And it's not just what we're avoiding, it's what are we creating? And when you think about it in those terms, rather than good or bad, allowed or not allowed, then you can start to teach a child how to relate to their own body. So let's now walk through a few different age groups and how to teach this. So if you have younger kids, under 8 years old, it's not a sexual conversation. It's a body conversation. Now, of course, you always have kids that develop a little bit faster, some that lag behind a little bit, so you know your kid and at what stages they're going to be ready for things. But under 8 years old, you really don't want to be adding this sexual meaning that isn't there yet. You just want to give a structure for them that, if you notice that they're touching themselves, one, you don't want to panic as a parent, but you don't want to put assumptions on that, assume that it means something it doesn't for them. So you can just say something as simple as, hey, I know that feels nice, but that's something that we do in private. That's it. It doesn't have to be some big, huge lecture or shame or grabbing and no, don't do that, of this instant, all of your anxiety is now thrust upon your child, and they are now in trouble for something that is completely normal and natural, and this is a developmental phase that they are going to go through. So knowing and expecting that this is going to happen, and then teaching them that this particular behavior is something that isn't to be shared with other people in public. This is something that they can do on their own. This is meant to be a private activity. On one of the many, many, many blog posts by LDS members and sex therapists that I have read through in the past year, there is one particular woman, I don't remember her name offhand, but I'll find it and put it in the show notes. She compares it to picking your nose, that, you teach your child that that's a behavior that, you do in the bathroom with a tissue, that's not a public thing. You can do it on your own time. in a similar way, we want to be teaching that in relation to touching your genitals. That is something that is done in private, that's not a public activity. And any conversation about masturbation can always lead to a safety conversation of, hey, that's your body, and it's okay that it feels good. We want to make sure that we're doing that by ourselves in our rooms, not having our hands down our pants when everyone's around, that's for you. And then you can immediately segue into a conversation about who is allowed to touch genitals, and that it is not okay for any adult to be touching, who's allowed to change your diaper, and who's allowed to help you with your pull-up, and who's allowed to touch there, and in baths, making sure that it is normalized, that that's your body, so it is normal and okay for you to touch it. But it is not normal and not okay for someone else to touch it. We really want to be creating this space where our children understand what is normal and natural and what isn't. So that if something were to happen, to occur, where someone else touches them inappropriately, they can then sense those feelings. There's tons of books on this. Again, go on to sexedrescue.com. Absolutely phenomenal resources there, and names of books that teach you how to teach your kids about this, how to have conversations, children's books that you can read to them of when you get the butterflies in your tummy, that's when you come and tell, daddy or mommy, like, what's going on and what happened. And teaching a child that their body is theirs is so important, and teaching them the right terminology for their body parts is the biggest protection that you can have against any sort of sexual violence. So always attach this. Remember that they are owners of their body. No matter how small and little they are, that is theirs. And so teaching them to be proud of that, teaching them that it's normal to explore, and then in the next breath, teaching them that they have a right to say no to certain types of touch, that they get to dictate who and when and how someone else interacts with them, from a high five to a hug to anything else. And we want to make sure that we're instilling that at a very young age. And it really begins with this conversation with, it's okay for you to touch, and we want to make sure we're doing that in private, but it's not okay for someone else to be doing this with you in private, and making that distinction. So, anytime I'm talking about young children especially, we want to kind of have the twofold conversation about what is okay, and then making sure when we're talking about what's not okay, it's always in relation to their safety from others, okay? Not from themselves, that like it's not okay to touch yourself. No, okay, this is an activity that can feel good, that's normal, but make sure you know in which context it's okay. So you're teaching that, the privacy and, making sure it's socially appropriate. But if you're going to teach that something is wrong, is not good, you want to be teaching that from a safety perspective of other people interfering with their bodily autonomy. Okay, moving on to slightly older children. So this is going to be, anywhere like 12 and under, so like 8 to 12-year-old range. This is when they are going to start becoming more aware. And again, they may not fully understand sexuality yet. In large part, they probably won't. But they are going to be start noticing, some feelings that are different than before within their body. And this is when you as a parent can start adding more context. So a sentence that you could possibly say is, as your body grows, you might notice new feelings. And that is a normal part of growing up. We want to normalize things that are normal. Normalize things that are developmentally fundamental to their growth as a human being. We need to normalize that. So then you can bring that back to what you want them to learn, that a part of growing up is learning how to take care of your body and how to respect it. You don't want to over-explain, but you don't want to create this fear you're helping make sense of why something may feel good. Our bodies are made to connect with other people. Now, you're at an age where that's not yet appropriate. So if you do have these feelings, and when you do touch yourself, we want to make sure that we're doing it where we're kind to ourselves, where we are being respectful of ourselves, and that we're not adding any sort of outside stimuli to that will help build an unhealthy view what healthy connection and relationships looks like, sounds like, and feels like. When children get older, into their teen years, this is where you really want to be encouraging their choices, helping them think about what they are choosing. And go back to my very first episode about the value of sexuality, teaching this in a value-based way of your decisions, adding meaning to your life, and what meaning do you want? What do you want to highlight? And what do you want others to know about you based on your choices? So, for a teenager, pretending that this doesn't occur isn't really helpful for them. So you do want to open up this lane of conversation, and that's a lot easier if you've been doing it since birth, since childhood. So it's just an open conversation that can be had at any time, and it's almost an expectation of your children of oh, here we go, mom and dad are talking about this again. But it's not a fearful conversation. It's in the same way that you would tell them to go pick up their clothes and do this and clean that. It's just, oh, mom and dad are always on my back. They're always just droning on and on about this and that. You want it to be in that same area, that it's not this other topic, but it exists just as normally as any other topic. So with teenagers, you're going to be acknowledging that they're having more sexual feelings. You are going to be having sexual feelings. That is a part of being human. And this is where you can start to question and say, it's not a matter of whether or not you feel them. It's how you respond to these feelings that you have. And you can start to ask, do you feel like you're choosing your behavior, or does it feel automatic? Are you just doing something out of habit because, it just feels good? Or is this an active choice that you're making? Is it working towards your goals? Is it taking time out of your day away from connecting with your friends or with, your family? Are you shut up in your bedroom, just masturbating all day? Is this really conducive to what you're wanting out of life? Is this adding and enriching your life? Or is this in some ways taking you away from actually building these real relationships, to actually working towards what true intimacy is? So we want to be asking those types of questions of, is this working for you? Is this moving you towards your goals? You as a parent want to be pushing them towards ownership of their decisions, ownership of the choices that they're making, and the impact that they're having not only on themselves, but the impact that they're then having on others, and the life that your child is saying they want to create. So it's not about managing them. We want them to manage themselves, because someday soon, if you have a 16-year-old, it's only 2 more years that they're going to be under your care before they're off. You want them to have confidence in their own ability to make choices and what they do with their time, in the way that they relate to their body, and the way that they relate to arousal, sexual satisfaction. There are healthy ways to relate to that. And those healthy ways do not include pretending like it's not there, that you don't have those feelings, that it doesn't feel good. That is not really helpful. And by shutting down this very natural, normal sensation and drive that we have, that can very easily lead to a dysfunctional relationship with our own sexuality. And I promise you, it will not serve them in marriage. If the whole goal is to get them to marriage and to have a healthy, intimate relationship, this path of shaming, of fear, of no, until you have that marriage certificate and then do whatever you want, is not leading where we want it to lead. It's not. I can say that with 100% confidence because I work with these couples every single day who that's what they were taught, and I help them deal with the sexual dysfunction that this has created and the hardships that it has brought onto their marriages. And on this point, if we are only teaching our children that the relationship that they have with themselves is only allowed to exist if it's in relation to someone else, of what their body can do for somebody else, that is a huge disservice as well. I speak to you as a 28-year-old single LDS member, and that part of my life, the fact that I do not have a partner, really shapes a lot of my views on the way that we teach sexuality. In a lot of ways, I am the least biased person in a room because I work almost exclusively with adults, and most of which are couples, and I see firsthand, where this leads, and this narrative that we are only good if someone else tells us we are. We are only good if you are able to get married, that your life only has purpose if it leads to marriage. That is so harmful if your child grows up and is someone like me, who by no lack of trying, I have not been able to find a partner. And I've really had to go on my own journey, because this is the way that I was taught my entire life. My entire existence was to grow up and get married, and that's how I'll have value, and that's when I'm allowed to relate to myself and my sexuality, and that's when I'm allowed to touch myself and others. By only living in relation to somebody else coming in and allowing me to, giving me permission, that can leave you quite lost when that doesn't happen. And it also adds this responsibility onto others that should not exist, because your confidence should come from you. It should be this self-confidence that comes from you and your relationship with God and how they feel about you. But if we continue to teach children that they only are able to relate to themselves through marriage, that can be a real detriment to a lot of adults, who they will grow into, because newsflash, the majority of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are single. That is a statistical fact. They are not in traditional family units. There's a lot of divorced members. So we want to make sure that, again, we are teaching anything dealing with the body, that it is good, that it is from God, that God, they have bodies too. That is important. And knowing that our bodies have sexuality, that is also God-given, that God, Heavenly Mother, Heavenly Father have that too, that is the type of teaching we want. That is the type of teaching that will lead to children that turn into adults who can make choices that align with their values, and it allows them to create healthy, intimate relationships, whether that be with family, with friends, or hopefully with a partner one day. But it doesn't only allow it to be in partnered relations, but rather as a holistic person, as someone that we are striving to become, we need to be capable of this. And I really obviously feel strongly about that because of the way that it's been taught for so long is something that I see so clearly with the position that I'm in with my life. In a lot of ways, I do see it as somewhat of an advantage because I don't have a lot of bias coming in to any sort of conversation around sexuality, in the sense that I know the way that I've been taught my entire life to live, and yet my life, in a large part, does not follow that pattern. As much as I have tried, it just did not take the path and route that I was told it would. And by having that, and then by pursuing an entire career that is the study of human sexuality, which I had only ever been taught that you're allowed to even talk about this topic if you are married, that's the qualifier. And I have in every single way gone against that. It has opened up this space where all of my curiosities are able to exist, and I'm able to see how we teach children, how this affects adulthood, especially for married people, because that's who I work with, but then I'm also able to experience the single side as well of how this affects adults who in later life are not married. So all of this to say, thank you for being here and for listening to what I do have to say, but also for being the type of parent that wants to do good and wants to teach your child and has a desire to be more comfortable with this topic, because that will help not only you and not only your child, but this entire church more than you could ever know. That is something that I just want to encourage everyone to get more comfortable with this topic, because it will help all of us, no matter what our position in life, whether we are married, whether we are single, whether we're divorced, whether we are married with no kids, whatever it may be, but also so we can help the rising generation. We can help our children to learn these things and these principles. It's just so important that we pass along greater knowledge than what we had growing up, that we can build upon what we were given, see where maybe we went wrong and like where our parents went wrong, and then try and do our best to fix that for the next generation, which they will inevitably need to fix as well. But hey, we're at least trying, right? And God loves effort. So thank you for joining me today as we tackled the taboo. And please make sure that you check out all of my other episodes, my Patreon, and of course, sexedrescue.com to get much more information on the topic of masturbation and how to have these conversations with your kids. Catch you next time.